everyone, and welcome. I am on the media drive for the Ford Shelby GT500. So this is going to be mostly a technical discussion about this car, as last night when they flew us in, I had discussions with chief engineer for Mustang, chief engineer for GT500, and a aero and cooling systems engineer. So I had a lot of technical discussions about this, and that's kind of what I want to dive into, and then later on we'll start to get into more of the driving impressions, and I'm also going to be driving on the track a little bit later today. So starting things off with the engine, 5.2 liter supercharged engine, has the same bore and stroke as the Shelby GT350. Why does it have the same bore and stroke? Well, it's the same block, and so they have made upgrades for it. A few additional improvements due to the fact that this is producing 760 horsepower rather than the 500 some that you're getting in the GT350. So the block has been improved, and that has then been transferred to the 350 for the 2020 model year, perhaps the 2019 model year as well. So power is 760 at 7,300 RPM. You have a red line of 7,500 RPM, so you're getting that full power all the way to the end, which is great. I love it when engines do that instead of just kind of peter out. And peak torque is coming on 625 pound-feet at 5,000 RPM. So somewhat up there, but this is supercharged, so you're going to have a nice, useful torque band across this engine. Now, again, this is supercharged, so it's a 2.65 liter supercharger sitting on top of the engine. It's inverted so that the scrolls, it's a root-style supercharger, are towards the bottom to help keep that center of gravity lower. So it pulls the air up through those scrolls, where it then passes through the intercooler and then comes back down into the engine. Of course, you know, cooling it through that intercooler before it's passed into the engine to help make better power. So you've got 6 heat exchangers up front, including for the intercooler. They have an additional radiator for the engine, so it has the same radiator actually from the GT350. However, they have an additional engine radiator on the passenger side to help. Obviously, 760 horsepower is going to create quite a bit more heat. So how are they dissipating more heat? Well, the front opening is twice as big as it is on the GT350, which they claim allows for 50% more airflow through it. Now, one of the interesting little stats that they gave us on this cooling system is that it can dissipate 230 kilowatts of energy, and so they said this is the equivalent of heating 12 homes. Now, when you hear that, as you know, just some random pedestrian, I guess perhaps it gets you excited. You think, wow, that's a crazy good cooling system. But it also reminds you, if you're kind of in the engineering background, that is how insanely inefficient combustion engines are. And so it has enough waste heat to heat up 12 homes while this thing is chugging along. So it's a massively powerful engine, and with a massively powerful engine, you produce a ton of excess heat. But they are maintaining that well with the front fascia, making sure plenty of airflow gets through it. And I was speaking with the cooling engineer. He was saying somewhere in the 40 to 60 mile per hour range. Once you get above that, it does not matter. You're never going to get overheat. You always have so much airflow going through the engine that power is not a concern, waste heat is not a concern. The thing will stay cool. So good to know you can romp on this thing on the track, and it's not going to derate. You're going to be fine out there as far as the cooling system is concerned. Okay, now moving on to the transmission, and I have so much to say about this transmission, and I have a lot to say about gearing, and I think it's worth kind of creating a unique video just on gearing alone, but I do want to have the discussion here. So this is a 7-speed dual clutch transmission, and let's get one thing clear right off the bat. It's fantastic. There is no delay between when I press this button and when it receives the command. So the command delay, the programming delay, I can't notice it. Of course, there is a bit of a time required for the shift. So you press the button, it immediately starts shifting. That's what I like about it. They say their shifts are as quick as 80 milliseconds, which is very good, and it is extremely quick. So I don't have complaints on the gearbox, aside from the fact that they are only offering a dual clutch transmission. So this is a 7-speed dual clutch transmission. It's the only option. On the GT350, of course, a 6-speed manual transmission is the only option. And I asked the question, why only dual clutch on this? Why not allow people, the choice of having the manual? And they said this is the first time that GT500 and GT350 have been sold together in showrooms at the same time. And they kind of split paths. They're very different cars. And so, that's a lot of the reasoning I think behind it is they have a different approach for each vehicle. Now, my complaint comes in with the gearing, because this is a 7-speed, the Shelby is a 6-speed, and the Shelby, the gearing isn't perfect, but it's very, very good. You hit top speed in the GT350 at 180 miles per hour in 5th gear. That's where 5th gear ends. So you're at the end of the rev range in 5th gear, then you have 6th gear for the highway. In this, you also hit top speed, 180 miles per hour, once again, just like the 350, and that's also in 5th gear, even though you still have 2 additional gears, and it does not take all of 5th gear to get there. So 5th gear could have been more aggressive, meaning you could have gotten to that top speed a little bit quicker. So I wish they would have made 5th gear more aggressive, and what I honestly wish they would have done, instead of having 3 overdrive gears, 5th, 6th, and 7th are all less than a 1-to-1 ratio. I wish that they would have had 1 through 6 be aggressive track gearing, because that's what this car is. It's a track menace. And then 7th would be your highway cruiser. Now, they said for fuel economy reasons, which I know no one's buying this car for fuel economy reasons, but gas guzzler tags, CAFE standards, that kind of thing. For fuel economy reasons, they claim that that's why they have that 6th and 7th, which are both high overdrive gears, meaning you get your RPM really low. And so by getting that RPM really low, they're giving you the option, let's say you're on a road that's 55 to 65, you can keep it in that really efficient engine, low RPM range. Let's say you get up to 80 miles per hour, then it dips into 7th gear, where you can get it once again significantly lower and keep it in that efficient range. So the gearing strategy for the last 3 gears seems to be more about fuel economy than performance, and that bums me out a little bit. I do wish it was just always as aggressive as possible. I'll say this to the end of time. I love aggressive gearing. This thing's, in the 50 mile per hour range in 1st gear. It's hitting 80 miles per hour in 2nd gear, 115 in 3rd gear, and at that point, you don't need the rest of the gears unless you're on a track. So for street use, the gearing's a little tall. For track use, it seems to fit this thing really well, especially because you have so much power, and so it's traction limited in those lower gears. You don't need a more aggressive gear ratio because you couldn't put the power down anyways. Does it mean you wouldn't want it so you could slide around and have fun with it? That's a case to be made, I think, to have those more aggressive options available and have it be a tighter 1 through 6 than a tight 1 through 5 or a more spread out 1 through 5. Another interesting thing about this transmission that I forgot to mention, so you have gears 1, 3, 5, and 7 on one shaft, you have gears reverse, 2, 4, and 6 on another shaft, and they're actually fairly different as far as the clutch packs. So gear 1 has 5 plates and more surface area versus gears 2, 4, 6 in reverse, which use 6 plates but less overall surface area. So I'll show you a little cutaway, but it's cool because obviously 1st gear is going to be your launch gear. If you're going to the drag strip, that's going to be the one that's going to be taking all the abuse, and so you've got a larger clutch pack there with more surface area that's able to handle it. So it's a wet multi-plate clutch. It's going to be able to run through these drag strip runs all day long, which is cool to see the difference in the transmission strategy between the different gears, and that gear 1 actually gets a beefier clutch pack to enable it to consistently put down those launches, because you're going to slip that clutch a little bit on the drag race to allow it to load up that rear, and then you're going to kind of clamp it shut and hold it and let it run down the line. And so they really do allow, from a design standpoint, that launch to occur with how they've designed the different clutch packs depending on what gear you are in. Moving back from the transmission to the rear differential, we get a 373 final drive ratio with a Torsen limited slip differential. This is the same thing you'll find in the Shelby GT350 as far as the style and the gear ratio. And so that is then sending power to those rear wheels, of course. 16.5-inch massive brake rotors up front. These are steel. They say versus the GT350, these have 25% more thermal heat absorption within them that they're capable of. So this car does weigh more than the 350. This thing's a little bit under 4,200 pounds, so about 400 pounds heavier than the GT350. And so if you do end up getting the carbon fiber track package, you take out about 80 of those pounds. But this thing's a heavy car, and so I asked Ford, where's this weight coming from versus the 350, and they said 2 major spots. They said the transmission, the dual clutch transmission, is about twice the weight as the manual transmission used in the 350. And then they said when you supercharge a car like this and you add significant amount of power, there's no way around it really. You're going to add about 200 pounds in doing so. So the engine's about 80 pounds heavier, but then of course you have to upgrade the cooling system, you have to upgrade the drive shafts, the brakes, larger wheels as a result of having those larger brakes, so it's on 20-inch wheels. And it's a multiplying effect. You increase power, you increase weight. It's just what happens. And so, it's about 400 pounds heavier than that 350, and a lot of that comes from the dual clutch transmission and the fact that you have to beef everything up to handle the additional power. Now, mentioning those 20-inch wheels, those are paired with Michelin PS4S bespoke tires that they, worked out with Shelby for this vehicle. So PS4S 315s in the rear, 305 up front, massive tires. And then if you do get the track package, the carbon fiber track package, then those are going to be Cup 2s instead of PS4S. Interesting thing here, the Shelby GT350 now only comes with Cup 2s. That's to differentiate it from the other Mustangs. Yet this GT500 in base version is coming with PS4S. Now, I was speaking with one of the engineers who's done a lot of the drag strip testing with this vehicle. This thing is capable of hitting the quarter mile in 10.7 seconds. So very quick on the drag strip, and he said there's minimal difference between the PS4S and the Cup 2s. He said on the GT350, when they were running the Super Sports, it was about a 0.2 second difference on the Super Sport versus the Cup 2 in the quarter mile for the GT350. Apparently with this GT500, it's very close with the PS4S tire versus the Cup 2, even though the Cup 2 does offer more grip on the track. So in a straight line, they said they've been able to tweak the tire so that it does very well on the, on a drag strip. Now, I briefly touched on, differences between this and the GT350, and it's a conversation really worth having. And I think, what many of the journalists are going to say about this car is that, the 350 is the purest car, and that the 500 is kind of the all-out track weapon. And that's an accurate statement, and to my surprise, it's not something that Ford denied. So I was speaking with the chief engineer of GT500 and saying, look, there's a lot of really cool things that you guys did with the GT350. The flat plane crankshaft, it revs to 8250, naturally aspirated manual transmission, nice aggressive gearing to fifth gear, and then you have that highway gear. I love the gearing strategy there. And so there's a lot of good driving purist things that they've done with the GT350 that they have changed with this GT500. And so when I was asking this engineer, what's your preference? What came out is look, if you're the driving purist, the GT350 is the car for you, and it's going to offer, I feel like, the more rewarding driving experience. What's going to be faster on a track? Hands down the GT500. So they said they had 3 goals with this GT500. Incredibly fast in a straight line, so they want it to do well on a drag strip, hence the 10.7 quarter mile. The second part was insanely fast on a track, so this is faster around a track than the GT350. 250 horsepower doesn't hurt. And then the third thing is they wanted it to be approachable. And I think that's part of this automatic transmission strategy and also some of the gearing strategy with this automatic transmission. But it is an approachable car in that, you don't feel like you're on edge driving this thing, even though you do have 760 horsepower. It's a pretty refined thing when you're cruising around like we are right now. And so it's insanely quick out there, but it's also meant to be this very livable machine that doesn't compromise in the name of performance. So it does the performance insanely well. It does the other aspects really well versus that GT350, which is more shifting its side towards, let's make this driving experience as fun as it can be. The numbers aren't as important. Just make it enjoyable. And so there is a split there between the two. And I respect Ford for admitting that and saying, the 350 is the purest car, because I haven't driven this yet on the track, but my initial impressions, the kind of smile that the 350 sparks, I get in this when I'm flooring it in a straight line, but I don't necessarily get it, going around the corners. I don't get to shift my own gears. The gearing strategy is a bit different, and I really love the 350 for what it is. The exhaust note in this thing is still absolutely phenomenal. And there's different options here and different modes that you can switch between. So as far as the noise is very good. One little thing that's interesting is you don't hear the supercharger. And so, in the Hellcat, 717 horsepower in those mid-throttle areas and mid-RPM areas, you hear a ton of supercharger whine, and I think it's really cool. It's completely subdued here. You don't hear any supercharger noise. Every now and then a little whistle from it, but rare to hear. And so really you just hear the exhaust. And the exhaust sounds phenomenal, so that's the good news. The bad news is I wish they had a little bit more supercharger noise to it. Now, speaking of the different driving modes, there's a lot of cool tweaks they've done here. And so as far as the shifting strategy, track mode actually has the smoothest shifts, while sport mode has the fastest shifts. So they wanted track mode to ensure that when it was shifting gears, it's not going to upset the car in any way. Let's say you're mid-corner and you're shifting gears, it's not going to upset the balance, versus sport mode is all about getting that as fast as possible. And so there's little different strategies. Also with the drag mode, what they do is they don't have it drop the RPM when you upshift, and so it kind of slams into that next gear. It's like power shifting in a manual transmission almost, to give you the best acceleration when you're going down the drag strip. So they actually do have useful, meaningful changes between the different modes and different strategies. Track mode's about keeping the car balanced and getting the fastest time around that track. And then drag mode is about getting the fastest time in a straight line. They actually change the suspension tuning for the rear suspension, so when you're in drag mode, the MagneRide will adjust and allow it to squat a little bit more right off the line, get some load transfer onto those rears, and then once you have that load transfer occur, boom, you're off. So I'm going to be on the drag strip later today, and I'm going to put a V-Box on the car, and I'll see what times I actually get. And so I'll include that kind of information displayed here, and also going to be driving out on the track later today, and I will include, my thoughts about that as well. Now, I've mentioned the packages that this car has. So there's a handling package and there is a track carbon fiber package. And I'll include a list of what these things include, but there was one thing that stuck out to me on both of these, both the handling and the track package. They give you an oil catch can. And to be honest, I don't know of any cars out there, especially modern cars, that offer an oil catch can from the factory. I thought that was very strange, and I'd love it if you guys do know of ones out there now. Like, let me know in the comments. I would be curious to know what they are, but I haven't heard of this in a non-aftermarket use. And so I thought, well, wait a minute, is it direct injection? Why are they doing this? No. The engine is port injection, and so you're not really need to worry about carbon fouling on your intake valve. So okay, well, why did they do this? Why did they put a oil catch can with the track package and not with the base car? Well, apparently in extremely high G cornering, so 1G cornering, which this is capable of, with the Cup 2s out on the track, apparently there are ways which that oil can slosh up from the oil pan, hit the PCV, and then go into your intake. And so rather than having blue smoke dump out the exhaust and cause concern for the driver, for that track package and the handling package, they have this oil catch can. So in those high G scenarios, if any oil is to slosh up, that oil catch can will receive it. Now, the very important question, what is this thing like to drive? And so we're going to work through the different systems here, starting with the throttle pedal. Now, I'm rarely disappointed by naturally aspirated or, supercharged engines, especially when they happen to be large V8s, and that is the case with this vehicle. So a great response from the throttle pedal and a nice direct feel to it. You can actually use modulation and get very different amounts of power depending on where you are within that throttle pedal range. So fantastic response from it. You can see it really lifts up the front end there. And yeah, the throttle pedal is exceptional. I really love the way that it feels, and we're just driving here in sport mode. I also really like the way the brake pedal feels. So it's immediate. Once you start touching that brake pedal, you immediately start to brake. So it has a nice feel to it, not a ton of travel and a good amount of pressure required in order to slow it down. I feel like it's going to be really nice out on the track, but a nice, a response from it. It's intuitive, it's easy to figure out, and it allows you to understand, what's going on with the braking very well. I really like both the throttle and the brake pedal feel. As far as the transmission, yes, of course, I would like to have a bit different strategy with the gearing, and I feel like it actually could use more aggressive gearing. This thing seems to be very approachable out here on the street, which I'm surprised by. You know, it's not this 760 horsepower monster that you really can't deal with. I mean, you can put your foot down second, and you can tame it. You can control this thing, and it can put the power down. So it's really impressive, and the transmission shifting itself is quite good. No delay between the computer response. So when you're asking it, hey, shift, there's a good, you know, quality there of when do I ask for it and then when does it start reacting. And it usually, especially on downshifts, reacts very quickly to what you're asking for. So I appreciate that about the transmission. And as far as the shift quality, I like this transmission. The speed of it's good. The shift quality is good. So I'm happy there. The gearing strategy I would slightly change. So what are we left with? Well, we're left with steering. And I'm not super crazy about it. I don't have anything really negative to say about it. It's a fairly light steering system. And so, of course, there's different modes that you can choose between. But overall, you know, it's a fairly high ratio, 16:1. It is direct, and that's, you know, the case that you get with these Michelin tires. They're very responsive tires, so when you ask for something, it does it immediately. I like that about it. It's just that it's a low effort, you know, kind of somewhat numb feel to the steering itself. So overall, driving experience, I'm actually impressed. I came into this, you know, expecting it to be pretty good, but I also came into this thinking I would love the GT350 so much more, and I do like the GT350 more. However, I'm very pleasantly surprised at how much I really do enjoy this one. They've done a great job. It is an approachable vehicle. It is an insanely powerful vehicle, and it seems very well equipped to do all the things that it's trying to do, which is a lot of different things. And so later today, I will be on the track with it and trying out the drag strip, and I'll provide some impressions about what I thought that was like. But overall, I've been really impressed with this thing. I do like the transmission. The engine's phenomenal. It could have a little bit of supercharger whine. So biggest complaints just being gearing strategy with those 3 overdrive gears. I feel like that's unnecessary. I wish there was a little supercharger whine. And steering is a little light for my taste. For something, you know, this big, this heavy, this monstrous, it's a track weapon. Perhaps a little bit more feel and a little bit more effort required, I think could be cool. So some quick comments about how this thing performed on the drag strip as well as on the track. Now, Ford claims a 0 to 60 of 3.3 seconds. My best time was 3.50 seconds, and keep in mind this is on a drag strip, but also my time is from actual 0 miles per hour, not with a foot of rollout like the big auto magazines use, so you'll likely see 0 to 60 times in the 3.2 range from them. For the quarter mile, Ford claims a time of 10.7 seconds, and my best of the day was 11.2 seconds. Half a second off, however, there was a significant headwind, about 20 miles per hour, as is evident from the burnout footage. You can see the smoke clears quite quickly. We're also 2,000 feet above sea level, so I don't doubt that in perfect conditions the 10.7 is possible, but I wouldn't expect to hit it your first time out on the drag strip. It's also worth noting that auto journalist superstar Jason Camisa came running over to me after I put down the best quarter mile time in our group, yelling and asking how much I weigh. None of your business, Jason. Just try to keep up, would ya? Great name, by the way. One thing worth noting is that there is a significant delay about 1 second after you release the brake pedal in launch control and when the car actually starts to launch. For drag racing, this makes the reaction time portion very difficult as you have to release the brake pedal long before you're given the green light. This was my second time on a drag strip ever, as is evident by my timid face on my very first run, as well as my wow reaction. The only other time was in a Dodge Demon, and while the GT500 is a second slower on the drag strip, it's still insanely fast, and it'll embarrass the Demon on a racetrack. Speaking of the track, the GT500 feels right at home. This was a very flat track we were driving on, and yet the Shelby was registering 1.3 lateral Gs in the corners and up to 1.5 Gs in braking. The G-forces were strong enough that my neck was genuinely tired after lapping. For 4,100 pound car and track package trim, this thing can handle. The power is constant and never ending, the braking is exceptional and I didn't feel any fade. I was impressed with the front end grip and also how easily it could put the power down. Now yes, with sharp inputs from steering and throttle, you'll find yourself power oversteering, but generally it's actually a very pleasant car to drive fast. I'm not the best driver by any means, and I didn't find it intimidating to drive relatively quickly. That's not something I often feel about cars with 760 horsepower. Overall, really impressed. I love the way this thing looks. The seating in it is really nice. It holds me in quite snug. These are the optional Recaros. They are completely mechanical, no electronic adjustment there, but they hold me very snug, which I do like. Cloth seats, Alcantara steering wheel, which some don't like because over time they kind of start to go away, but I really like Alcantara steering wheels. The driving position's really good. I love the way the front fascia looks on this car. I think it looks so cool. So overall, not too many bad things to say about this. This is a phenomenal car that is not going to disappoint you when you get in it. And I was honestly surprised because I thought the gap of how much I would like the 350 more than this would be larger than it is, and I'm truly impressed by this vehicle. So thank you all so much for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, of course, feel free to leave those below.